I'm Lauren, 28 female. I live in a modest one-bedroom apartment downtown, a quiet sanctuary from the noise of my job as a financial analyst and, as it turns out, the even louder noise of my family. For years, I believed that being the easy child, the one who never asked for much, was a virtue. It turns out, it just made me easy to overlook. The story I'm about to tell you isn't about one single event, but about the moment a single slice of birthday cake made me realize my portion of love and respect in my family had always been given away to someone else. Before this story unfolds, I'd love to connect with you. Please let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is in your corner of the world. It's amazing to see how far these stories can travel. Growing up, my role in the family was clearly defined. I was the responsible one, the quiet one, the one who understood. My younger sister, Naomi, was the vibrant one, the creative spark, the one whose needs were always just a little more pressing. My father, Matthew, a history teacher, had a way of framing this dynamic as a historical inevitability. Lauren's the stoic Roman, and Naomi is the passionate Greek, he'd say with a chuckle, as if assigning us historical archetypes absolved him of the need for equal parenting. My mother, Thea, a librarian who cherished peace above all else, was the great enabler of this system. Her mantra was "don't rock the boat," a phrase she deployed anytime I even hinted at the imbalance. Birthdays were the perfect microcosm of our family's dysfunction. Naomi's birthdays were events, weeks of planning, themed parties, carefully curated guest lists, and gifts that were both expensive and deeply personal. My birthdays were quieter. They were always a family affair, which was code for a low-effort dinner at home, often with a cake my mom would pick up from the grocery store on her way home from the library. I was conditioned to see this as normal. I was the mature one, after all. I didn't need the fuss. I told myself I preferred it that way, a lie I'd repeated so often it almost felt true. The tradition was that I was supposed to be grateful for whatever I got, because wanting more would be rocking the boat. My 28th birthday was supposed to be different, or so I'd hoped. I'd just closed a major account at work, a grueling 3-month project that had left me exhausted but proud. I felt, for the first time in a long time, like I had something real to celebrate. I didn't want a party, but I did want to feel seen. A week before my birthday, I called my mom. "Hey, Mom," I started, trying to sound casual. For my birthday this year, I was wondering if we could do something a little special. There's a chocolate raspberry cake from that little bakery downtown, the Sweet Crumb, that I've been wanting to try forever. I held my breath. It felt like such a huge ask, which was ridiculous. It was a cake. My mother's hesitation was a palpable thing, even over the phone. "Oh, honey," she said, her voice laced with that familiar preemptive apology. "That bakery is quite expensive, and it's a bit out of the way. Are you sure the one from the supermarket won't do? They have a lovely black forest." It was a test to see if I would be the easy child again, and like always, I folded. "No, you're right," I said, my voice smaller than I wanted it to be. "The supermarket one is totally fine. Don't worry about it." I hung up feeling a familiar pang of disappointment, not just in her, but in myself. Why couldn't I just insist? Why was my one small request treated like an unreasonable demand? The day of my birthday arrived, a dreary Tuesday. I worked a full day, my colleagues offering cheerful happy birthdays. That felt more celebratory than anything I expected at home. I bought myself a new book and a fancy coffee, my own small acts of rebellion. When I arrived at my parents' house, the scene was exactly as I'd pictured. The smell of my mom's standard pot roast hung in the air. My dad was in his armchair, reading a thick historical biography, and he looked up only long enough to grunt, "There's the birthday girl." Naomi was sprawled on the sofa, scrolling through her phone. "Happy birthday, Lore," she said, her eyes not leaving the screen. Dinner was fine. The conversation, as always, orbited around Naomi. Her latest graphic design project, a frustrating client, a funny meme she'd seen. I tried to talk about the big account I'd landed at work, the one I was so proud of. I managed to get out about 2 sentences before my dad interrupted. "That reminds me," he said, turning to Naomi. "Did you finish that logo for the school's history club? I told Mr. Henderson you'd have it done." Naomi sighed dramatically. "Dad, I have paying clients. I'm doing that as a favor." My achievement was forgotten, reduced to a conversational stepping stone to get back to Naomi. I ate my pot roast in silence, the meat feeling tough and tasteless in my mouth. My mother kept shooting me little, nervous smiles from across the table, silently begging me not to rock the boat. As dinner wrapped up, Naomi's friend Maya arrived. This was not unusual. Naomi's friends often just dropped by, their presence always welcomed with more enthusiasm than my own planned visits. "Maya, so good to see you," my dad boomed, standing up to give her a hug. "You're just in time for cake." My mom bustled into the kitchen, and I felt a flicker of hope. Maybe she had gone to the bakery. Maybe my one small request had been heard. But she returned carrying the familiar square box from the grocery store. It was the Black Forest cake. The same one we'd had for my birthday for the last 5 years. A perfectly fine cake, but it was a symbol of being unheard, of being deemed not worth the extra effort. It was the cake of compromise, and I was the only one ever compromising. Still, I forced a smile. I was Lauren, the easy one. I was supposed to be grateful. My mom placed the cake on the dining table, its whipped cream peaks and maraschino cherries looking almost garish under the warm light. She stuck a few candles in it, not 28, just a handful for decoration, and started a slightly off-key rendition of Happy Birthday. My dad and Naomi joined in, their voices flat and obligatory. Maya, Naomi's friend, sang with a surprising amount of enthusiasm, which somehow made the whole thing feel even more pathetic. I blew out the candles and made a wish I knew wouldn't come true. A wish to feel like I mattered as much as everyone else in the room. "All right, let's cut this thing," my dad said, taking the knife from my mom. This was another one of his little traditions. He was the patriarch, the dispenser of treats, the one who decided who got what. He cut a generous slice for Naomi first, then one for Maya, then my mom, and finally himself. Each slice was a hefty wedge. I watched as he surveyed the remaining cake. A little less than half was left. My plate was still empty. I waited. He looked from the cake to me, and a strange expression crossed his face. Not malice, not exactly, but a kind of thoughtless inconvenience. "You know," he said, gesturing vaguely with the cake knife, "I think Maya might want another piece. Young people have such an appetite." He didn't even ask her, he just assumed. He glanced at me. "Lauren, you don't mind, do you? You're always watching your figure." It wasn't a question. It was a statement, a dismissal of my desire wrapped in a backhanded compliment. Before I could even process the words, he was cutting another large slice and sliding it onto Maya's plate. She looked a little uncomfortable, but accepted it with a quiet thank you. Now there was just a sliver of cake left, a piece that was mangled and small, barely a mouthful. My dad looked at it, then at me, and with a casual shrug, he said the words that would echo in my mind for years to come. "Oh, sorry, Lauren, doesn't look like there's enough left for you." He said it so easily, so matter-of-factly, as if commenting on the weather. He then put the knife down and picked up his own fork, digging into his slice as if nothing significant had just happened. The room fell silent for a moment. My mother's eyes were wide, and she looked at my father, then at me, her expression a frantic plea for me to just let it go. Naomi was oblivious, already halfway through her slice, talking to Maya about some new filter on Instagram. No one defended me. No one said, "Dad, what are you talking about? It's her birthday." No one offered me a piece of their own cake. I was invisible. My own birthday, and I was denied a piece of my own cake in my own family's home, so that a guest could have seconds. Something inside me, a tightly wound coil of years of quiet acceptance and forced smiles, finally snapped. It wasn't a loud, explosive break, but a clean, silent severance. I didn't yell, I didn't cry, I didn't make a scene. I simply looked at the pathetic sliver of cake, then at my father's oblivious face, and a profound, chilling clarity washed over me. This wasn't about cake. It was about respect. It was about value. And in this family, I had none. I stood up slowly, my chair making a soft scraping sound on the wooden floor. Every eye was on me now. My mom's face was pale with panic. "Lauren, honey, what's wrong?" she whispered. I didn't look at her. I looked at my dad, who was now frowning, fork halfway to his mouth. "What's the drama, Lauren? It's just cake." "You're right," I said, my voice eerily calm. "It is just cake." I turned and walked out of the dining room. I went to the hall closet, took my jacket off the hook and slipped it on. My keys were in my pocket. As I walked toward the front door, their voices started to rise behind me. "Where are you going? Don't be so dramatic," my dad called out, his tone shifting from dismissive to angry. "It's your birthday party." "She's just trying to get attention." Naomi scoffed. I paused with my hand on the doorknob. The accusation hung in the air, so perfectly backward that it was almost funny. I had spent my entire life trying not to get attention. Their words followed me as I opened the door. "Lauren, this is so ungrateful," my dad shouted. "We cooked you dinner. We bought you a cake." Ungrateful? The word hit me, but it didn't hurt. It was clarifying. I was ungrateful for being ignored, for being treated as an afterthought, for being told my presence was less important than a guest's appetite. I didn't turn around. I didn't argue. I didn't try to explain the chasm that had just opened up in my soul. I just walked out into the cool night air, closing the door softly behind me. The click of the latch felt like the final word in a conversation I had been losing my entire life. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew, with absolute certainty, that I was never coming back to that table again. The drive home was a blur. I didn't turn on the radio. The silence in my car was a welcome relief from the cacophony of my thoughts. When I got back to my apartment, I didn't turn on the lights. I just sat on my sofa in the dark, my jacket still on, replaying the scene at the dinner table over and over. My phone buzzed on the coffee table. A text from my mom: "Please come back, you're upsetting your father." Another from Naomi: "Seriously, way to ruin your own birthday." I swiped them away without responding. Upsetting my father, ruining my own birthday. The narrative was already being written, and once again I was the villain. But in the quiet darkness of my apartment, something else was happening. The shock was wearing off, and in its place, a cold, hard anger began to solidify. The cake incident wasn't an isolated event. It was a symptom of a disease that had been festering for 28 years. It was the final, undeniable piece of evidence in a case I hadn't even realized I was building against my own family. I had spent a lifetime making excuses for them. Dad's just old-fashioned. Naomi just needs more attention. Mom's just trying to keep the peace. But they weren't excuses, they were chains, and that tiny, insignificant slice of cake had finally given me the key to unlock them. I spent the next few days in a fog of introspection. At work, I was on autopilot, running numbers and building financial models while my mind was excavating the past. It was like I had been given a new lens through which to view my own history, and everything looked different. I remembered being 10 years old and winning the school science fair. I was so excited to show my dad the blue ribbon. He glanced at it, said, "That's nice, honey," and then immediately turned his attention to Naomi, who was crying because she'd fallen off her bike and scraped her knee. My ribbon was tucked away while her knee was cleaned, bandaged, and kissed, the hero of the hour for simply being hurt. I remembered my high school graduation. I was salutatorian. I had a small speaking part. My parents were there, but they left right after the ceremony because Naomi had a dance recital across town that same evening. They missed the celebration with my friends, the pictures, the feeling of accomplishment. I have a single photo from that day, me in my cap and gown, standing alone by the school sign. There are dozens of photos of Naomi in her dance costume from that night. The financial aspect, which I, as an analyst, couldn't help but notice, was the most galling. It was a ledger of 1,000 small cuts, Naomi's private art classes, her brand-name clothes. The down payment they loaned her for her trendy apartment, a loan I knew would never be repaid. Meanwhile, I worked part-time jobs all through high school and college. I took out student loans, which I was still diligently paying off. When I asked for help with a security deposit for my first apartment, my dad had given me a lecture on financial responsibility and the importance of standing on your own 2 feet. At the time, I had internalized it. I was proud of my independence. Now, I saw it for what it was, a convenient philosophy applied only to me. They didn't teach me to be responsible. They just refused to be responsible for me. The more I thought about it, the more the pattern emerged. It was in everything. The way they spoke about our careers, Naomi was the creative genius, while I was the practical one, as if my success in a demanding, high-stakes field was somehow less impressive than her freelance design work. It was in the holidays, where gifts for Naomi were always thoughtful and expensive, while mine were often gift cards or a generic sweater. It was in the simple, daily interactions. If Naomi called, my parents would drop everything. If I called, I was often told, "Can I call you back, Lauren? We're in the middle of something," which usually meant they were watching TV. The worst part was realizing how complicit I had been. I had accepted the role T. Hay gave me. I had swallowed the slights, minimized my own needs, and pretended I was okay with the crumbs of affection they tossed my way. I had prided myself on being low maintenance, but all that meant was that I was maintained at a lower level. My silence had been misinterpreted as agreement. My independence was taken as a sign that I needed nothing. My phone buzzed again. It was a call from my dad. I let it go to voicemail. He didn't leave a message. A few minutes later, he texted, "Your mother is very worried. You need to stop this silent treatment nonsense and call us. We are your family." The arrogance of it was breathtaking. He wasn't sorry. He was annoyed that I wasn't playing my part. He wasn't reaching out to apologize. He was demanding I return to the status quo. That text was the final confirmation. There was no misunderstanding here. This wasn't a mistake they would learn from. This was who they were. And I had a choice to make. I could answer the phone, accept a non-apology, and go back to being the easy daughter until the next inevitable slight. Or I could finally, for the first time in my life, be difficult. I could finally rock the boat. I could build my own boat in an entirely different ocean. And as I sat there, the anger finally cooled into a calm, quiet resolve. I knew what I had to do. My inner financial analyst was kicking in. It was time to audit my life, and this family was an asset that had been yielding negative returns for far too long. It was time to divest. In my line of work, emotions are liabilities. Decisions are made based on data, on verifiable facts, on patterns that emerge from careful analysis of spreadsheets and financial statements. For the first time, I decided to apply the principles of my profession to my personal life. I needed to see the full picture, not just the emotional memories, but the cold, hard numbers that underpinned 2.5 decades of favoritism. It was time to audit my family. My first step was to create a spreadsheet. It felt clinical, almost detached, but it was the only way I could process the information without being overwhelmed by resentment. I created columns: date, event, expense Naomi, expense Lauren, and notes. I started digging, not out of a desire for petty revenge, but for validation. I needed to prove to myself that I wasn't crazy, that I wasn't just being dramatic or ungrateful. I needed the data to back up a lifetime of feeling second best. I started with the big things. I went online to my old university's tuition records portal. My 4 years of tuition, fees, room, and board. I entered the total into my column. Then I did some research on the private arts college Naomi had attended for her graphic design degree. It was significantly more expensive per semester. I knew my parents had paid for it because Naomi had bragged about graduating debt-free. I made a conservative estimate and plugged it into her column. The difference was already staggering, well over $100,000. Then I added my student loan balance to the notes column for my entry. Next, cars. My first car was a 15-year-old sedan my dad had helped me buy from a neighbor for $2,000, which I paid him back for from my summer job earnings. Naomi's first car, a graduation present, was a 3-year-old, top-of-the-line import. I found the Kelly Blue Book value for that make and model from that year, another massive discrepancy. I added it to the spreadsheet. The investigation became an obsession. I scoured old photo albums and my mom's meticulously kept calendars from when we were kids. Naomi's entries were filled with expensive summer camps, art camp, horseback riding camp. My summers were spent at the local community pool or a low-cost day camp run by the Parks Department. I researched the costs of those camps and added them. The dental bills for Naomi's braces. The cost of her high-end laptop for her design work, a necessary expense for her career, while I had used the university library's computers until I could save up for my own. As I dug deeper, the ledger of small cuts I'd felt emotionally began to take on a terrifyingly concrete form. The small checks I knew my parents slipped Naomi for rent help. The phone bill I was kicked off of the day I turned 18, while Naomi remained on the family plan. The way they'd paid for her spring break trips in college, while I was told those were luxuries I needed to earn myself. Each entry was another weight, another confirmation. The most difficult part of the investigation was uncovering a secret I had long suspected but never had the courage to confirm. My grandmother, my mom's mom, had passed away when I was in high school. She had always been my champion, the one person who saw the disparity and tried to correct for it in small ways. She left both Naomi and me some money in her will. I received my portion when I turned 25, a check for $10,000, which I had dutifully put into a high-yield savings account, a crucial part of my emergency fund. I was always told Naomi received the same. But something had always felt off. Naomi's spending habits had increased dramatically around that time, far beyond what her entry-level design job could support. With a knot in my stomach, I realized I might be able to find a clue. My mom, Thea, for all her conflict avoidance, was a creature of habit and meticulous, if outdated, record-keeping. She kept all important family documents in an old filing cabinet in the guest room, a room I'd stayed in dozens of times. The next weekend, I called my mom. I told her I needed to pick up a few old yearbooks I'd left in the closet. My voice was steady, betraying none of the turmoil inside me. She was relieved to hear from me, and in her typical fashion, avoided any mention of the birthday incident. "Of course, dear. I'll be at the library, but you know where the spare key is." It was perfect. Letting myself into my childhood home felt strange, like breaking into a museum of my own past. I went straight to the guest room and the filing cabinet. It wasn't even locked. I found the folder labeled Estate Docs Mom. My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside were copies of the will and the disbursement statements from the estate lawyer. My eyes scanned the document until I found it. 2 checks had been issued. One to Lauren M. Peterson, in trust, for $10,000. And one to Matthew and Thea Peterson, in trust for Naomi K. Peterson, for $50,000. I sank to the floor, the papers rattling in my hand. $50,000, 5 times what I had received. The document stated that the trust was to be managed by my parents until Naomi turned 25. They had known. They had known for a decade that my grandmother had left Naomi a substantially larger sum, and they had never said a word. They had actively participated in the lie, telling me we had been treated equally. Why had my grandmother done that? The will didn't say. Maybe she felt Naomi would need it more. Maybe my parents had influenced her. I would never know. But what I did know was that my parents had perpetuated a monumental deception. They had watched me take out loans, work multiple jobs, and stress about my finances, all while they managed a 5-figure trust fund for my sister. They had lectured me on fiscal responsibility, while sitting on a secret that made a mockery of the entire concept. That was it. That was the final num. In my spreadsheet. I took a photo of the document with my phone, put the folder back exactly as I had found it, and left the house without the yearbooks. The entire drive home, I didn't feel sadness or anger. I felt a profound and complete sense of detachment. The emotional connection I had been fighting to preserve was finally, irrevocably gone. They were no longer just a thoughtless, favoritist family. They were liars. The data was in. The analysis was complete. And the conclusion was undeniable. It was time to close the account. The discovery of the inheritance discrepancy changed everything. My mission was no longer just about creating emotional distance. It was about achieving total systemic independence. I named the project Operation Silent Severance. The goal wasn't a dramatic, explosive confrontation. That's what they would expect. My father would relish a good argument, my sister would play the victim, and my mother would cry until I gave in. No, my revenge would be quiet, methodical, and absolute. It would be the financial equivalent of walking out the door and closing it so softly they wouldn't even hear the click. They wouldn't realize I was gone until they reached for me and found only empty air. My life was already mostly separate from them, but there were still a few lingering threads, financial and logistical ties that I needed to sever. First, my emergency contacts. At my job, my parents were listed. I went into our HR portal and changed it to my most trusted colleague and friend. I updated my hospital records and my apartment lease information as well. It was a small, administrative task, but it felt monumental. I was formally declaring that in a crisis, they were no longer the people I would count on. Next, I tackled the few remaining joint possessions. There was an old savings bond my grandparents had bought for me when I was born, still kept in my father's safe deposit box. I sent him a polite, formal email, the kind I would send a client, requesting that he mail it to me at his earliest convenience. I gave no explanation. He called immediately, his voice laced with suspicion. "What's this all about, Lauren? Why the formal email? Is this still about that stupid cake?" "I'm just organizing my financial documents, Dad," I said, my voice cool and professional. "It's a loose end I'd like to tie up. Please just send the bond." The businesslike tone threw him off. He couldn't get a foothold for an argument. He grumbled but agreed. The bond arrived a week later in a plain envelope with no note. I cashed it the same day. One more thread cut. The biggest project was future-proofing my life against them. I met with a lawyer to draw up a will and a living will. I was only 28, but I wanted it ironclad. I named my cousin, my mom's sister's daughter, who had always been kind and fair to me, as my executor and the one to make medical decisions if I were incapacitated. The lawyer asked if I wanted to explicitly disinherit my parents and sister. "Yes," I said without hesitation. "I want a clause that states they are to receive nothing from my estate, not for any lack of affection, but by my deliberate choice." The legalese felt like a shield. Then I turned my attention to the core of my plan, which was inspired by my father's own words. Stand on your own 2 feet. I decided to take that advice to its logical, and for him, unforeseen, conclusion. For years, I had been the family's unofficial tech support, accountant, and general life admin person. I managed my parents' online banking passwords, helped them with their taxes every year, and troubleshooted every computer problem. Naomi was constantly sending me freelance contracts to look over real quick. I was their free, on-call consultant. My silent severance meant that my services were now permanently discontinued. The first test came in early March tax season. My dad called. "Hey, Lauren, I have all my documents ready. When are you free to come over and do our taxes?" It was the same command, disguised as a question, that he'd issued for the past 6 years. "Actually, Dad, I won't be able to do them this year," I said calmly. "My workload is really heavy, and I just don't have the bandwidth." Silence, then sputtering. "What do you mean you don't have the bandwidth? You always do them. It only takes you a couple of hours." "Those are a couple of hours I don't have to spare this year," I replied, keeping my tone light but firm. "I'm sure you can find a good CPA in town. I can even send you a couple of recommendations if you'd like." "A CPA, they charge hundreds of dollars," he sputtered. "Yes," I said. "Professional services usually come with a fee." The unspoken part hung in the air between us. "The services you've been getting for free for years." He hung up on me. It was a small victory, but it felt incredible. A week later, a panicked call from Naomi. "Lauren, my laptop crashed, and I have a huge project due. I think I have a V." "Uris, can you come over and fix it? You're so good with this stuff." "Oh, that sounds stressful, Naomi," I said with practiced sympathy. "I'm really slammed right now, but I know a great IT repair shop downtown. They're super reliable." I texted her the name and address. She replied with a single, angry question mark. I didn't respond. My mother was the last one. She called, her voice trembling slightly. "Lauren, your father is trying to book flights to visit your aunt, and he can't get the airline website to work. He's getting so frustrated. Can you please just help him?" This was the hardest part. My mom wasn't malicious, just weak. Her pleas were the ones that had always worked on me. but I thought of the inheritance document. She wasn't just weak, she was a willing participant in the deception. "I'm sorry, Mom, I can't," I said gently but resolutely. "I'm in the middle of something. Dad is a smart man, I'm sure he can figure it out." "You're being so cold, Lauren," she said, her voice cracking. "I don't know what's gotten into you." "I'm just busy, Mom," I said. "I have to go." I ended the call before she could start crying. Each of these conversations was a small tear in the fabric of our old relationship. By the end of spring, the fabric was in shreds. They were being forced, for the first time, to navigate the world without their safety net. They were being forced to stand on their own 2 feet. And they were discovering, much to their dismay, that it was expensive and inconvenient. My silence wasn't loud, but its consequences were reverberating through their lives in 1,000 frustrating ways. The best part was, I hadn't done a single thing to them. I had simply stopped doing things for them. For nearly a year, I maintained my quiet distance. Communication was minimal and strictly logistical. I sent polite, happy birthday texts and a generic Christmas card with my signature, nothing more. I declined every dinner invitation with a simple, "I'm sorry, I have other plans." My life, free from the constant, low-grade stress of their dynamic, began to flourish. I received a promotion at work. I started dating someone, a kind architect named Ben, who listened to my stories without judgment. I was building a life that was truly my own, and it was peaceful. The inevitable confrontation came, as I knew it would, not with a bang, but with a financial whimper. It was a Tuesday afternoon when I got a call from my dad, Matthew. His voice was strained, stripped of its usual booming authority. "Lauren, we need to talk. Can you come over for dinner tonight? It's important." The old Lauren would have felt a surge of anxiety, a worry that something was terribly wrong. The new Lauren simply felt a sense of weary inevitability. "I can't do dinner, Dad," I said, "but I can stop by for a few minutes around 7. "Fine," he clipped and hung up. When I walked into their house, the atmosphere was thick with tension. My mother, Thea, was sitting on the sofa, wringing her hands. Naomi was there too, perched on an armchair, looking sullen. My father stood by the fireplace, his posture rigid. This was an ambush. "Lauren, thank you for coming," my father began, his tone formal and rehearsed. "Your mother and I are in a difficult situation. As you know, the roof has been leaking for a while, and the contractor said it needs a full replacement. The estimate is significant." He slid a piece of paper onto the coffee table. It was a quote for nearly $20,000. "On top of that," he continued, not looking at me, "the property taxes have gone up, and with me retiring in a couple of years, things are going to be tight." I looked at the quote, then back at him. I said nothing. My silence unnerved him. "Naomi has been helping out where she can," he said, gesturing to my sister, "but her freelance work isn't always stable. We were hoping you could help. Alone, to help us through this." The audacity of it was almost stunning. After a year of me pulling away, after a lifetime of financial favoritism, their first substantive contact was to ask me for money. Not just any money, but an amount that dwarfed anything they had ever invested in me. I picked up the contractor's quote and studied it for a moment before placing it back on the table. "I see," I said, my voice perfectly level. "That is a difficult situation." My mother finally spoke, her voice pleading. "We wouldn't ask if it wasn't an emergency, honey. We're your family." "Yes, you are," I agreed softly. I reached into my purse and pulled out my phone. I navigated to my photo gallery and found the picture I had taken in the guest room nearly a year ago, the photo of the estate document. I enlarged it and placed the phone on the coffee table next to the roofing quote. "Let's talk about family finances," I said, my voice hardening just a little. "This is a copy of the disbursement statement from Grandma's estate. It says here that a trust of $50,000 was established for Naomi. I, on the other hand, received $10,000. For 10 years, you both knowingly lied to me about this. You lectured me about financial responsibility while you managed a secret fund for my sister." The color drained from my parents' faces. My mother looked like she was going to faint. My father stared at the phone, his mouth opening and closing silently. Naomi looked from the phone to me, her eyes wide with a mixture of shock and guilt. "You watched me take out student loans," I continued, my voice gaining strength with every word. "You watched me work 3 jobs in college to make ends meet. You made me pay you back for a $2,000 car. All the while, you were sitting on this. So, you want to talk about money? Let's talk about the money." I pulled out a folded piece of paper from my purse. It was a printout of the spreadsheet I had so meticulously created. I flattened it on the table. I did an analysis, a conservative one. Over the past 28 years, accounting for college tuition, cars, extracurriculars, and direct financial assistance, you have invested approximately $200,000 more in Naomi's success and comfort than you have in mine. And that doesn't even include the $40,000 head start from grandma. I let the numbers hang in the air. The silence in the room was absolute. "You are asking me," I said, my voice now cold as ice, "the daughter you consistently underfunded and lied to bail you out of a financial problem. The answer is no." My father finally found his voice. It was a choked whisper. How could you throw this in our faces?" "Throw it in your faces?" I almost laughed. "You are the ones who came to me for money. You want to know the price of a birthday cake, Dad? This is it. The price was my trust. The price was my respect. The price was any sense of familial obligation I might have had left. You didn't just deny me a slice of cake. You told me in the clearest possible terms that I was not entitled to even the smallest share. And I finally believe you." I stood up. "My advice is to talk to Naomi. Her $50,000 trust, if it was invested wisely, should have grown considerably. Perhaps she can help with the roof." Naomi flushed with anger. "That money's gone. I used it for a down payment on my apartment." "The apartment you told me you saved up for all by yourself?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. "Another lie, I'm shocked." I turned to my parents one last time. My mother was openly weeping now. My father just looked old and defeated. "I will not be your financial safety net," I said. "You made your investment decisions a long time ago. Now, it's time for them to mature." I walked to the door, my steps feeling light. I didn't feel angry anymore. I didn't feel hurt. I felt free. As I opened the door, my mom cried out, "Lauren, please, don't do this to us." I paused and looked back at them, a family in a portrait of their own making. "I'm not doing anything to you," I said, my voice calm and final. "I am simply doing for myself. You taught me to stand on my own 2 feet. I'm just returning the lesson." I walked out and closed the door, and this time I knew they heard the click. The year following the confrontation was one of profound and quiet transformation. The silence from my family was absolute. No angry calls, no pleading texts, just a vast, empty space where obligation and resentment used to live. It was unnerving at first, like the phantom limb of a life I no longer had. But slowly, peace began to fill that void. News of my family's situation trickled back to me through my cousin. My parents had to take out a high-interest home equity loan to pay for the roof. My father, Matthew, postponed his retirement indefinitely. The financial strain created cracks in their carefully constructed world. Without me as the family scapegoat and free-of-charge problem solver, they were forced to face their own dysfunctions. My father's lectures on history and my mother's quiet avoidance were useless against a leaking roof and a mountain of debt. They had to learn how to use Google and call a handyman. They had to learn to manage their own lives. Naomi, without the constant financial and emotional cushion, was also forced to grow up. She had to take on less glamorous corporate design jobs to ensure a steady paycheck. She and my parents, once united in their shared focus on her, began to bicker. Their relationship, built on a foundation of indulgence and enablement, couldn't withstand the pressure of actual hardship. She resented them for not being able to support her lifestyle anymore, and they resented her for being a financial drain. They were all just people in a boat they had rocked themselves. As if. Or me, my life moved in the opposite direction. Ben and I got engaged. We bought a small house in a quiet neighborhood with big trees. The process of building a new family, one based on partnership, mutual respect, and open communication, was healing in ways I never imagined. We talked about everything, including my family. He never told me what to do, but simply supported the choices I made for my own well-being. On the morning of my 29th birthday, I woke up to the smell of coffee and something sweet baking. Ben was in the kitchen, pulling a tray of cinnamon rolls from the oven. "Happy birthday," he said, kissing me. I thought we'd start the day right. There were no grand gestures, just a quiet, thoughtful act of love. It was more than I had ever gotten from my own parents. That evening, we didn't go out. I had made a specific request. I spent the afternoon in our new kitchen, mixing ingredients from scratch: flour, sugar, eggs, and the best cocoa I could find. I was baking my own birthday cake. It wasn't the fancy chocolate raspberry cake from the Sweet Crumb that I had once begged my mother for. It was a simple, 3-layer chocolate cake with buttercream frosting. My cake, made with my hands in my home. As I was putting the finishing touches on it, my phone buzzed. It was an unknown number. I hesitated, then answered. "Hello." "Lauren," the voice was timid, hesitant. It was my mother. I just wanted to call and wish you a happy birthday." I was silent for a moment, surprised. "Thank you," I said, my voice neutral. "I know it's probably too late," she continued, her voice thick with emotion. "But I wanted to say you were right about everything. We failed you. I failed you. I was a coward and I let you down. I am so sorry." It was the apology I had waited my entire life to hear. And as I listened, I didn't feel the rush of vindication I might have expected. I just felt a quiet, deep sadness for all the years we had lost, for the mother-daughter relationship we could have had if she had found this strength sooner. "I appreciate you saying that, Mom," I said, and I meant it. "I hope things are okay." "We're managing," she said. "It's been hard. Your father and I were talking, really talking for the first time in years. And Naomi, she's learning." There was a long pause. "I miss you, Lauren." "I have to go, Mom," I said gently. It wasn't cruel, it was just the truth. The door to that part of my life was closed. Acknowledging her apology was one thing, reopening the wound was another. I wished her well and ended the call. Later that night, Ben and I sat at our small dining table. He lit a single candle in the center of the chocolate cake I had made. It looked beautiful, rich, and dark and perfect. He sang "Happy Birthday" to me, his voice warm and sincere. I blew out the candle and smiled. Ben cut the cake. He served me the first slice. It was a large, generous piece. As I took the first bite, the flavor was incredible, rich, sweet, and satisfying. It wasn't just the taste of chocolate. It was the taste of peace, of self-respect, of a life I had built for myself. It was the sweet taste of my own cake, and I knew with absolute certainty that there would always be enough for me.